Hello and welcome to this quick tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make these cute zipper pouches using Tunisian crochet honeycomb stitch. The first thing you will need is a zipper, and the length of the zipper you choose obviously will determine the size of the pouch. A tiny 3 or 4 inch zipper like this will make a little coin purse, a 9 or 10 inch will make a pencil case or a larger makeup bag, and a case for a laptop should be around 12 to 13 inches, and that's what I'm going to be making today. As far as yarn, you will need 2 balls, one for the foreground and one for the background. I will be using sport weight yarns for this project. So here I have this unusual variegated sort of metallic cotton viscose I got on sale, which calls for a 4mm crochet hook. So it's sort of a heavy sport weight. In the background, I'm just going to use this basic cotton that I have left over in a light sport weight. The smaller pouches are a great way to use up small amounts of yarn that aren't enough for something larger. I'm going to show you how to work your stitches right into the zipper, so unfortunately that requires a tiny pointy crochet hook like this one. You can't read that, but it's 1.5mm. And for the Tunisian part, we'll be working in the round, so a double-ended hook is required in a 4mm size. This is one end, and this is the other end. Both ends look the same. A quick note on gauge before we get started. Here I have a finished pouch, and you can see, if you count them, that there are approximately 24 Tunisian honeycomb stitches per 10 centimeters. And some quick calculations will tell you that when picking up stitches along our zipper, we should aim for each stitch to be approximately 4mm apart. Having said that, when I pull up stitches along my zipper, I do not precisely measure this out. I just get a sense of approximately how far 4mm is for the first couple of stitches, and then I estimate it as I go forward. If you are using a sport weight yarn and a 4mm hook like me, you shouldn't have to do this gauge calculation for yourself. The project is quite forgiving and generally aim for slightly crowded stitches, and you can't go wrong. So here is my 12-inch zipper. Starting at one end of your zipper, and I do find it easier if the zipper is closed, choose a point about halfway between the teeth of the zipper and the edge. Insert your tiny hook and, using your foreground yarn, pull up a loop. I do find this a little bit difficult. My yarn splits very easily and the hook is really tiny relative to the yarn. So hopefully you will choose a yarn that doesn't split as easily as mine. Once you've got it pulled up, pull that loop up fairly tall, maybe to the edge of the zipper. Advance about 4mm on your zipper and pull up another loop. Now here we are going to try to pull up both loops to approximately the same height. And of course I've split mine again. And then we're just going to work a slip stitch. So pull the new loop through the old loop and avoid the temptation to pull it really tight to sort of make it look more neat. Just let that first loop be a little bit loose. We're going to work as loosely as possible here. Advance another 4mm, pull up another loop, again pulling it up to around the same height, and work a slip stitch. Now this process is admittedly a little bit fiddly, especially when you're working sport weight with this tiny hook. Trust me when I say that even if your chain ends up looking pretty messy, the tension can be a little uneven, just generally aim for it to be as loose as possible because we're going to be pulling up stitches from within that chain. So the looser you can work this, the better, and don't worry if it's a little messy and uneven. Another way I've seen this worked in other tutorials is to actually work a single crochet rather than a slip stitch, which requires you to work across the edge of the zipper. So if you were going to do it that way, you might want to start off a little closer to the edge. But yeah, working a single crochet instead of a slip stitch is another way to do this, and at the end the stitches are a little bit easier to work into. Unfortunately though, I don't really like the way this looks in the end. I think it just creates kind of a weird looking messy edge, so I prefer to work this as slip stitch all the way down. Here's what my first few look like. You can see the tension's uneven. A couple of these are going to be a little bit tight, but just do your best and work all the way down. And I do think working into the zipper is worthwhile because it prevents you from having to sew the fabric on at the end, and it also makes sure that you have just the right number of stitches for the length of the zipper without having to do any special calculations. So here I am almost at the end. Once you get to the very end of your zipper, just continue until you're right at the point where the zipper itself can't be closed any further. Then we're going to choose a point that is very close to the edge of the zipper. This may be slightly hard to get into because it's often a bit plasticized, but pull up one final loop there, again pulling it up to the same height and working a slip stitch. Then to get across the gap, we're just going to work 2 chains. So chain 1 and chain 2, and make sure again that they're fairly loose, the same height that you've been working all along. Choose a spot that is directly across from where you finished up on the other side, again very close to the edge, so that you can work a chain stitch across the gap. And again here I split the yarn a bit, pull the loop up loose, and work your slip stitch. Now you're on the other side of the zipper, so just choose a point again directly across from where you finished up on the other side at your usual halfway point. Work a slip stitch, and then keep going as you did on the other side all the way down this side of the zipper, so around 4 millimeters apart. And once you get back around to where you started, just finish up directly across from where you did before. And we're going to again cross the gap by working 1 slip stitch very close to the edge in that plasticized area, pulling the loops up tall. And this time the gap is much more narrow, so we don't need to work any chains. So just insert into the other side directly across from where you finished up and work a slip stitch. No need to chain 2. Then finish up by inserting the hook right into the spot where the last or the first chain of the other side started. So that way we have a continuous loop of chains all the way around the zipper. Now here's where the fun part starts. Switch to your 4 millimeter double-ended Tunisian crochet hook, and now we're going to start pulling up stitches from the top loop of this chain all the way around. Now the fiddly part is ongoing here, because no matter how loosely I try to work these, I do find that they're a little bit hard to get that much larger hook into. You're going to want to choose a Tunisian hook if you can that has a nice pointy edge. And the very first one will be worked across the edge of the zipper like you can see there. Don't worry, that won't be visible in the final product. And in the way of Tunisian crochet, whenever you pull up a loop, you just keep it on the hook so that you gradually accumulate more and more loops on the hook as you go along. And remember, we're just working into the top loop of the chain. If you find that some of these are too tight to work into, grab your tiny hook again and use that to help you pull up those loops, and then you can just pull the loop up big and stick it on the Tunisian hook and pull it snug. So I do that quite a bit as I go. Once you have a certain number of stitches on the hook, especially the stiffness of the zipper makes it very difficult to proceed. So once you have enough, turn the work around, push the work to the other end of the double-ended hook, and we're going to work the return pass. So introduce your return pass yarn, simply hook it around the Tunisian hook, and pull it through 1 loop on the hook. And that is the only time we will do that. Every other time we will yarn over and pull through 2 loops on the hook. So pull through both the return pass loop and the forward pass loop. So yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and do that all the way until you have approximately 2 stitches remaining on the hook. It doesn't really matter how many you leave, but I always leave 2. So here I am at the end of the return pass, 2 stitches on the hook, pull things snug, turn the work back around, and you can continue to pull up stitches from your chain. And again, just keep doing that until you have enough stitches on the hook that things become difficult to proceed. Do it as often as you like. And on subsequent return passes, always just yarn over and pull through 2 stitches every time. The only time you yarn over and pull through 1 is when you're introducing the return pass yarn for the first time. So you can see here I'm yarning over and pulling through 2 all the way down the line on the return pass. So here we are at the end, and you're just going to proceed around this 180-degree turn by pulling up loops in the chain, again using the top loop of that chain the same as you've been doing. And always remember that when you try to go around these 180-degree turns, you really can't get very far if you've got some stitches on the hook. So work the return pass in order to proceed around those turns, and that'll make it much easier if you don't have any remaining stitches on the hook, or you only have a few. And then continue down the other side, again using your fingernails to get under those stitches if you have to, and having a low threshold for using your tiny hook to help you. So here I am at the other end. I'm close to being back around to where I started. Once you've pulled up a loop in the very last chain stitch, you are ready to start your first real Tunisian round. And this is where it starts to get easier and more fun. So here I am pulling up the very last loop in the very last chain. Now, I recommend pulling up the return pass yarn tail here so that you can see your Tunisian stitches. They will appear as these vertical bars. Here's the first one, there's the second two. They each have a front and a back loop, and I'm just going to manipulate the work a little bit. First work a return pass and then twist the work around to show you the front and back loop of these vertical bars. So hopefully you can see there that metallic yarn has a front and a back loop. When we work our Tunisian stitches, we're going to be inserting between the front and back loop. The first stitch is going to be worked as a simple stitch, so just insert the hook behind that front bar, yarn over, or just grab the yarn with the hook and pull it through. The next stitch is a purl stitch. Place the hook behind the working yarn and insert in the same way. Let the working yarn fall in front of the stitch and then yarn over and just pull it through in the usual way. So that is a purl stitch. So we're simply going to alternate simple and purl stitches all the way down the line. So the next stitch is a simple stitch and then a purl stitch. Place the hook behind the yarn, insert from right to left, let the working yarn fall in front and then yarn over and pull through. If you need any help with the purl stitch, I recommend my honeycomb stitch tutorial, which I've linked in the description. And I just want to show you what the return pass looks like. Again, the same. Yarn over and pull through two, no special tricks here. Once you get to the end, you just want to make sure that you work the return pass and start those 180-degree turns with no or just a couple stitches on the hook, and that'll make it easier for you to go around. And once you do get all the way around the turn, just work the return pass again to make it easier on yourself. I go as far as I possibly can, pulling up as many stitches as I can, and things start to get tight and awkward. Once you have worked this first round all the way around and are back to the same end of the zipper as where you started, so here I am working the last few stitches. So that one was a purl, and the next one will be a simple. There's a trick here. When working honeycomb stitch, you must always work a simple stitch into a purl stitch from the round before, and vice versa. When working in the round, this requires an odd number of stitches for it to work out correctly. Rather than counting them all, I deal with this by just examining the next few stitches from the round before and determining if things are going to line up correctly. Here is a purl stitch under my thumb. You are going to recognize it by the purl bump at the base of the stitch. So let's just look ahead in the fabric and identify a couple of these. So here is a purl stitch. There is its purl bump, pretty conspicuous in that metallic purple. Then that means the next one is a simple, and here is another purl. So we want to work that purled stitch as a simple stitch. And the next stitch, which is the last stitch of the round before, is actually a simple stitch, so it needs to be purled. Unfortunately though, we have finished up on a purl stitch in the current round. So that means that this next simple stitch needs to be purled. We would be purling 2 stitches in a row. That means we must have had an even number of stitches rather than an odd number. We are going to correct that by working a simple increase, where you insert the hook into the return pass chain before the next stitch and just pull up a loop. So we have increased by 1 stitch, now we should have an odd number, and on the subsequent rounds our honeycomb alternating pattern will work out correctly. So then you just continue working in honeycomb stitch. So remember, this was a simple, so we purl it. This next stitch is a purl stitch as we identified, so we work it as a simple stitch. And then purl, and then a simple. So that little trick just prevents you from having to count up all your stitches and make sure you have the correct number. Again, if you want to do that, it is an odd number of stitches that you're aiming for. So here's the beginning of our fabric. It's starting to look pretty good. Once you get to the end of this first honeycomb round and are ready to work the second round, there is just one more trick that I recommend doing in order to shape the pouch nicely. Just to increase the width of the pouch a little bit beyond the ends of the zipper, I recommend identifying the apex at the end of the zipper, which I've determined is this space right here, and working up until that point in your regular honeycomb pattern. Then we're going to work a double increase in which you yarn over in the usual way and then work a simple increase by pulling up a loop from the return pass chain. So this has the effect of inserting 2 new stitches, and there they are, a yarn over and a simple increase. This is just a way to work an increase in honeycomb stitch without messing up your purl simple pattern for the subsequent rounds. So then just continue working in honeycomb stitch, working the purls as simples and the simples as purls. Here is what the return pass looks like. There I've worked through the simple increase, and there I've pulled through the yarn over. Nothing special to do there. Do the same thing once you get to the other end of the zipper. Identify where the apex is, work up until that point in honeycomb, and then just work a double increase. So yarn over and pull up a loop from within the return pass chain. So you've just worked an increase on either end of the zipper, which I think just makes it look a little better. You don't have to do that. If you're making a change purse, I find it just creates a slightly cuter shape so that the pouch is a little bit wider than the zipper itself. If you're working a larger project like a laptop case, you probably don't really need to do this, but just determine if you want the pouch to be a little tiny bit wider than the zipper or not. It's really up to you. Then just continue working honeycomb stitch all the way around, and you just keep going until the pouch is as long as you want. When you're ready to finish up, just turn the pouch inside out and then fold it along the edges of the zipper all the way to the bottom. If you've worked a little farther than you should have, you can just pull the stitches out so that you're at sort of the corner that you've created by folding it. And then what I do is I cut the forward pass or the foreground color. You can use either color to sew up, but I tend to use the return pass color. So cut the forward pass color and pull that last loop through, and you can sew it in later. Then I do switch to a regular crochet hook here. You don't have to. You can use your Tunisian hook to do this. I just find it's a little bit easier with a regular crochet hook, and you don't need your Tunisian hook anymore. Get yourself set up so that you can work slip stitches to close this seam. So we're going to do that by identifying the window that exists between 2 vertical bars. So underneath the return pass chain, insert into that space in the front of the fabric, and then here's a close-up of me inserting it in the same space in the back of the fabric. So you're going to go through both layers of fabric here, pull up a loop, and work a slip stitch. And we're going to do that all the way down to close this seam. So identify that wide open window between 2 vertical bars in the front and back fabric. So just underneath the return pass chain, pull up a loop, and work a slip stitch. And as you go, those windows should start to line up pretty nicely, so it becomes much quicker and easier to do. And work a slip stitch each time. So this has the effect of closing those large window-like spaces between the stitches without having to do any sort of a cast-off process, so it sort of combines 2 steps in one. And as we go, you can see how those windows of space line up and are very easy to identify and get the hook into. So work slip stitches all the way down until you get to the end, and here I'm just working the last one. You sort of can find that last window of space, put your hook in, and work a final slip stitch. Then you can just cut the yarn and pull the loop through, and you're finished. You've created a nice seam at the bottom. Turn the project right side in. Of course, you're going to weave in those ends eventually. If you find that these little free ends of the zipper pop out, just poke them back in. If you find they keep doing that, you can always sew them down, but I've never had to do that. So here you can see that the top of the zipper where the fabric joins the zipper is really quite neat despite our harsh beginnings with our messy chain. I think it looks really nice, and you didn't have to do any sewing, which I love. The bottom corners and seam are pretty neat looking, I think. A great project for a rainy day. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for watching.